What President Trump, what he did today is straight out of a dictator's playbook. Revoking the security clearance of former CIA Chief John Brennan is nothing but a blatant attempt to silence a critic, to take away his right to free speech, to purge him. And the reason this White House gave is beyond belief.
Mr. Brennan has recently leveraged his status as a former high-ranking official with access to highly sensitive information to make a series of unfounded and outrageous allegations, wild outbursts on the internet and television about this administration. Mr. Brennan's lying and recent conduct, characterized by increasingly frenzied commentary, is wholly inconsistent with access to the nation's most closely held secrets and facilities, the very aim of our adversaries, which is to sow division and chaos.
Lying, increasingly frenzied commentary. Just let that settle in. Think about that for a minute. This White House is actually attempting to claim with a straight face that lying and wild outbursts on TV and Twitter are reason to revoke security clearance? Okay, so let me ask you this. Who else makes wild outbursts? Who else lies? How about the man who gave secrets to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Ambassador Sergei Kislyak right in the Oval Office? How about that? How about the man who, by the Washington Post's count, has made well over 4,200 false or misleading claims in his presidency so far? How about the man whose tweets, like calling ex-aide Omarosa a dog, are a personal grudge match? That man, of course, is Donald Trump himself. And John Brennan, the man who convinced President Barack Obama to go ahead with the raid that took down Osama bin Laden, knows exactly what this is all about.
I do believe that Mr. Trump decided to take this action, as he's done with others, to try to intimidate and suppress any criticism of him or his administration. And revoking my security clearances is his way of trying to get back at me.
So John Brennan, not the only one President Trump is targeting. He's not alone. Listen to Sarah Sanders reading out what sounds an awful lot like the president's enemies list. And we know how an enemies list worked out for a previous president.
James Clapper, James Comey, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and Bruce Orr.
So what do all those people have in common? All of them have been targets of Trump's public ire, or they've criticized Trump, or both. Not on the list, fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his conversations with Ambassador Kislyak. And taking another page out of a dictator's playbook, President Trump seems to be trying here to manipulate the news cycle. We see you. Take a look at his statements as it was sent out today. Clearly dated July 26, 2018. That's 3 days after the White House first said the president was considering the move. So why would they sit on this for nearly 3 weeks? And why release it today? Well, the White House aide claims it's nothing but a cut and paste error. Wood versus wood, it's a cut and paste error. And the president tells the Wall Street Journal tonight he was prepared to do it last week, but it was, this is in his words, it was too hectic. He was on vacation last week. But you've got to wonder about the timing here. There are a couple of possibilities here. One is that this could be just a case of a thin-skinned president lashing out one day after Brennan tweeted, quote, "It's astounding how often you fail to live up to minimum standards of decency, civility, and probity. Seems like you will never understand what it means to be president, nor what it takes to be a good, decent, and honest person. So disheartening, so dangerous for our nation." But there's another possibility. Is this a cynical attempt to change the narrative while the president is still battling the fallout over ex-aide Omarosa's explosive and unproven charge that a tape exists of Trump using the N-word while he was on The Apprentice? And is a jury in Virginia, as that jury is set to begin deliberating in just a few hours, in the first trial of the Mueller investigation, the trial of Paul Manafort? Is that one of the reasons? A former Trump campaign manager could spend the rest of his life behind bars if he is convicted of all the charges against him. You've got to wonder, is this president hoping to distract you from that? So let's begin our coverage now. I want to bring in CNN contributor John Dean, who was, of course, Nixon White House counsel, knows a lot about enemies lists. Also, CNN global affairs analyst Susan Glasser. She is a staff writer for The New Yorker. Good evening to both of you. Good to have you on. John, I'm going to start with you because Sarah Sanders said Trump is still considering similar action on Comey, Jim Clapper, Michael Hayden, Sally Yates, Susan Rice, Andrew McCabe. President Nixon famously had his enemies list. Is this President Trump's?
Well, it certainly has got some similarities. Don, I did some research today to look into what Nixon had done in this area to see if he'd ever used the security clearance apparatus as part of his way to get at his enemies. I can find no similarities. In fact, the big difference I find between Nixon and Trump is Nixon talked a tough game. It's on the tapes, there are memos that are written, but there's no execution on most of this stuff. Whereas Trump seems to know that, and he executes. He just does it. Yeah. That's the big difference.
I want to take you and our viewers back a little bit. This is from back in the day, you testifying to Congress about Nixon's enemies list. It's from NBC. Here it is.
No, and as I have submitted in documents, other agencies were involved in seeking politically embarrassing information on individuals who were thought to be enemies of the White House. I might also add that in my possession is a rather, very much down the lines of what you're talking about, is a memorandum that was requested by me to prepare a means to attack the enemies of the White House. There was also maintained what was called an enemies list, which was rather extensive and continually being updated.
Talk to me about that. Was that gasps?
There was a silence in the room, then a gasp, and everyone was kind of stunned. I hadn't put that in my prepared testimony. I'd actually talked to Lowell Weicker, who was questioning me at the time, senator from Connecticut, and mentioned it to him. And I said, if you ask the right questions, I have some documents the committee may find of interest. He did ask the right questions, and I turned over the documents.
Susan Glasser, I want to bring you in now because you find it ironic that President Trump says Brennan engages in unfounded and outrageous allegations and wild outbursts on the internet. Sounds like someone we know, doesn't it?
You know, Don, I'm still recovering from yesterday's wild outbursts on the internet from the President of the United States. You know, I had one of those moments, it hits you at different times, right? But yesterday morning, remember that feeling of waking up? It was only 24 hours or so ago, and, you know, realizing that even though nothing is truly shocking anymore, the President of the United States called someone a dog yesterday, and now today he's accusing someone else of frenzied commentary on the internet. But I think John's point is a really interesting and excellent one. In a way, right, the difference between Nixon and Trump, many people have pointed this out, but it seems relevant today, is that it's almost as if many of these things that Nixon took such pains to hide on the tapes are actually playing out in real time. There's gasps in the room when John Dean, you know, decades ago, talks about an enemies list. Today, you have the face of the president's own press secretary calmly reading out a list of names. There's no audible sense of shock or dismay anymore, and I think that's part of the difference from where the country was at with Nixon. There was still the ability to shock and horrify people in both parties when the president violated norms. And today we come to this apparently unprecedented situation of retaliating against a political opponent by withdrawing his security clearance. And, you know, how many people are actually even shocked by it anymore? Very few.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if we hear in coming days, subsequent days, that these other folks' security clearances have also been taken away as well. John, you know, John Brennan spoke with MSNBC earlier, and he said this is how tyrants and despots act. Is this an attack on free speech?
Absolutely is. He's unhappy with what Brennan has said. He's attacking him for it. What's stunning to me is he just totally ignored the process that's inherent in the executive order that establishes the security system and sort of unilaterally invoked his own will. Now, he can't really do that, and I'm hopeful Brennan will stand up and test this because there is a procedure, and he just totally ignored it.
Yeah. So, Susan, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal tonight, Trump says that he was prepared to yank Brennan's security clearance last week, but it was too hectic. He also told the Wall Street Journal that that he would put a Republican on it too if I thought they were incompetent or crazy. What was so hectic about being on vacation last week?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, Don, on that one. I think it's a really interesting question that John raises here, which is, imagine that there were to be a legal case testing whether this constitutes a presidential abuse of power, whether it constitutes a violation of John Brennan's First Amendment rights to speak as he pleases. It's a very interesting question. I think no one disputes the idea that the President of the United States has more or less unchallenged power to grant and revoke security clearances, but once there is an administrative process in place, and it does appear that President Trump has violated what would be the normal process for granting or revoking a clearance, that to me is a very interesting set of legal questions. And so you could actually be facing wholly separate from the Mueller investigation. What if you had a federal court case making its way through the system challenging whether there was a presidential abuse of power here, which is what this seems like to a layperson like me. It seems like almost the definition of a presidential abuse of power.